Our third Hyrox workout station is the sled pull. And in this video, we're going to go through what the workout station rules are for the sled pull, some movement techniques, so things to think about whilst we're executing it, and then some common faults that we see so you can practice not doing them in your training. So let's look at the rules for the sled pull then. When you first come into your lane, when you first come into the workout station, you are going to be assigned a lane. That is going to be done by a judge. They'll be stood somewhere along the sled pull area, waving their arm around and pointing to a sled. You must go where they point. Once you're there, you're going to see your lane, and that is going to be lined with two long white lines. And at the end of each end of the lane, you're going to have a box marked out with a white line at the front and one at the back. Essentially, the white line is lava. You can't touch the front of the box or the back of the box with your feet. You're going to do 4 12.5 meter lengths of sled pulling. You can use any technique for that sled pull, and I'll go through the ones that we suggest in just a moment. But your length is going to be completed when you have pulled that sled all the way over the front line of your box. If you are doing solo, you're obviously going to complete that whole length yourself and then run down the other end. If you're doing doubles, you can swap in and out whenever you want to during each length. But when you are not pulling, you need to stand directly behind your partner, and you cannot help them with the rope. So a really common thing when you're doing the sled pull is that it kind of bunches up and sits in the middle of your lane underneath your feet. Just be aware that as the non-working partner, you can't touch that rope. So leave it be. If it does coil up, you as the working athlete needs to sort it out, kick it out of the way, etc. Okay, technique then. So a couple of things to think about with the sled pull. The first thing is the technique that you use is going to be completely dependent on your ability to move the sled. In the open division, that is either going to be done with just your arms or with a hip extension technique, and I'll come on to that in just a minute. With the pro division, I don't think I've ever seen somebody not do what we call the walk back method. That is just because the sled is super, super heavy. You're going to have to leverage your body weight as well as your strength in order to move the sled. With all of them, though, there are some basic principles that we want to apply. First of all, we want to make sure we're in line with the rules. But the second is that we want all of the effort we put into the sled to be moving it. So the first thing you'll notice in this video is that before I start to move that sled, I am taking all of the slack out of the rope. So when I get into the lane, I'm going to find the rope on the floor. You can see at the start of this video, I pick it up, and there is a point at which all of the slack has been taken out of the sled, of the rope. The ropes are quite stretchy, and if you just start to yank on the rope, you're going to feel that stretch and it's going to pull you forwards. So make sure you've got it nice and tight before you start moving. The second thing is that we are effectively setting ourselves up for the movement pattern of a deadlift, particularly if you're doing the hip extension or the walk back method. That initial setup position is going to be very, very similar. So we want the feet underneath the hips where they are able to drive down through the floor and generate power. We want some tension in our quads, our hamstrings, our glutes, and we want the back to be nice and neutral. From this position, depending on the technique you use, things might change, but in all cases, that initial setup, as you can see me here, we've got that tension out of the rope, and we've got the force being produced down through the floor in the middle of the foot with our feet underneath our hips. So let's have a little look at the different techniques that you can use on the sled. So generally speaking, we've got 3. As I said, it's going to be entirely dependent on your ability to move that sled. So if you're in the open division and you're super strong, you've got some upper body strength, you may well opt to use the hand over hand method. So as the name suggests, you are setting yourself in that position I just talked through, and you are moving your hands over the top of each other, pulling with predominantly your biceps. This is a really effective technique because it uses, as you can see, almost entirely your upper body, and no other movement in Hyrox does that. So we're going to conserve energy elsewhere in the race. But you do need to be nice and strong. It's definitely one to practice in training. As you can see here, the key thing to think about once you've got yourself set in that position I just talked through is that we've got short, choppy arm pulls. So we aren't thinking about big hand placements. It's just really short, fast movements. Just take note that with each pull, the sled isn't moving very much. It's lots and lots of reps. But assuming you've got the upper body strength to do this, it's going to be nice and quick. If you can't quite do that, the second method to resort to is the hip extension method. And the reason for this is with each and every rep, the sled moves a lot. So we're doing very few reps, which means we're moving nice and efficiently through each of the lengths. That setup position then is exactly the same as I talked through just a minute ago, with the feet underneath the hips. We've got our weight through the middle of our feet, and we're thinking about driving our feet through the floor or pushing the floor away from us. From then, we're trying to straighten the legs and bring the hips through, so squeeze our butt, whilst pulling our arms at the same time. We'll just show you a couple of reps here. So once you've got the tension out the rope, it's a big leg drive, and then thinking about driving the hips through to meet the sled. You can get the sense, although you can't see the sled here, that the sled is moving quite a lot with each rep. So we may well be able to get away with fewer reps versus the hand over hand method. Now, when you come into your lane, it's worth understanding that the further the sled is away from you, the harder it is to move. So you may find that after a couple of hip extension reps, you're then able to go hand over hand. And I definitely recommend doing that. As I said, that hand over hand method is going to be a lot less taxing on your lower body and save some energy for later in the race. Now, pro division folks, you are almost exclusively going to be using the walk back method. I don't think I've ever seen somebody not do this. As the name suggests, you are going to be quite literally walking back with the sled. So that setup position is the same, tension out the ropes, feet underneath your hips, driving through the midfoot. But we're now starting to think about using our body weight. So we're still going to do the hip extension. We're still going to straighten the legs and drive our hips through. But you can see once I've stood up, I lean back through the rope, keeping my arms straight, and I'm using my body weight as leverage to move the sled backwards. Last little tip we've got for you here is when we are working in doubles, it's common practice for people to do a couple of pulls each. Now, after a bit of experimenting across a couple of doubles races, we've actually found that doing a single rep each is a really nice way of picking up the cadence of your pulls. If you can practice this and get your little transition timed well, then it isn't going to cost you any time doing one rep each, and you get a bit of rest after each one. The second thing you'll see here is a partner tap on the back. So it's really awkward when you're doing the sled pull and the walk back method to stop yourself before you touch the line behind you in your lane. Because as I said, you can't touch those. So you would effectively be having to pull and look back behind you at the same time. If you watch the video now, you'll see that is my cue to let go of the rope. So I'm now no longer involved in the sled. So it doesn't matter if I touch the line now, and I can then move out of the way and Nathan can come in. So as soon as he taps me on the back, as soon as I get close to that line, he can then dive over my shoulder and jump in for the next rep. As I said, really nice way to pick up the cadence, give you a little bit of rest in between, and make sure that you aren't touching that back line.